All right, ladies and gents, today we're going to be talking about what the process of building a computer is and how to do that. And it's kind of going to be a gloss over, but I really want to talk about how to build a computer and what it is because I've realized a lot of people don't know exactly what that is. Okay, through the video, I'm going to be wearing this blue wrist strap. It's called an Esd strap. You can get them for a few dollars. And if my body has static electricity, it will stop this motherboard here from being shocked at all and damaging it if I have static electricity. Some people don't wear them. Just use caution. Parts can be shocked and break. It's not likely, but it does happen. Okay, when we say building a computer, we're talking about buying a motherboard that's a prepackaged motherboard from many manufacturers, and you get parts based on this motherboard and you put them in a case, and that's what your gaming computer is. It doesn't exactly mean glowing lights or anything, but it's a motherboard and computer parts designed with gaming in mind. Okay, so the first part I have here is called the CPU. This is essentially the brain of your computer. So when you get your CPU, it's dictated by what motherboard you have. The CPU I have here is a Ryzen 3700X. It's gonna be able to do 1080p gaming at over 100 FPS with the correct graphics processor that goes with it. And with the graphics card I have, it should do great for what I need. Okay, so CPUs are installed if you have an AMD system. They're installed by taking the pins on the bottom of the CPU and putting them into the motherboard. The motherboard CPU slot is almost always in the middle on commercial motherboards. You want to line up the dot or whatever marker is on your motherboard with the marker on your CPU to make sure that you put the pins in the correct spot. If these pins are bent, the CPU will not work. Just remember your motherboard's web page or the manual will tell you what CPUs can go in. And also, when you get the CPU in, there's a metal clamp arm. What you're going to want to do is lift that arm and push it down, and then once you feel it sealed, you'll be able to know. So you put that in and clamp the arm down. That's how you seal the CPU. But before I show you that, I'm also going to show you guys mounting a Intel CPU just in case you guys have Intel. Intel, the pins on the CPU are not on the CPU actually. The pins for Intel will be in the motherboard. Same process though, you do not want these things to bend. Just remember on the Intel board, you're still going to want to line up the markers on the CPU and motherboard. That stays the same no matter what. Okay, to put that arm down, you're going to have to put the arm down, and on Intel there's a little area where you put the arm under. So when you push that arm down and you put the arm under there, that's what seals it. On AMD, it's kind of harder to see what's locking it into place, but give it a little force when you push it down. It will take a little bit, but you'll feel it when it's locked. Just make sure your CPU is locked in place and the pins need to be correct. Okay, now for RAM. RAM is where your computer holds programs and things while it's working on them. The more you have, the more you can do at once, and sometimes you need enough to do one program. So what's going on here is you need to line up the hole in your RAM with the little line on your RAM slots in your motherboard. And always remember, with RAM, you don't want to put them right next to each other if you have 4 slots. Slots go together in gaps, so you want to put them in 1 and 3 and 2 and 4. So this way they work the fastest together. Do not put them next to each other. This will slow your RAM down, and if you paid for high-speed RAM, you won't get the speed you paid for if they are slotted next to each other. So for case, I have chosen an NZXT S340. Well, I chose this years ago. This PC is actually being updated, not exactly built, but I'm going through the building process. This case is a basic case. It could have better air for the motherboard, but the parts I've shown you, you usually want to put those on before you put them in the case, but the case is what holds the computer together, so your motherboard has somewhere where air can hit it in a controlled environment. And then usually in the bottom of the case, you have what's called a power supply. This thing goes in the bottom of your case, and the cables on a power supply go into your motherboard and power everything. This is where cable management comes into play. You want to route cables through your case, and cases have areas where you route cables through. You put the power supply in the case, and you put cables into the motherboard, and this is PC building. So my power supply is a 750 watt power supply like the one that was shown, and my cables are what's called semi-modular, so I can plug in extra cable for different parts I need on the PC. So this allows you to keep your cables neat. You always want cables neat so you can add and remove parts as easy as possible. So they don't have to be too crazy. Some people are, but you do not want your computer to look crazy. Here's the back of mine for an example. It's not amazing, but I try my best to be able to work with it in the future. I show my front here too, just to see that you do have to route cables in the front, and you really want to spend time cable managing because you want to be able to add and remove things as neat as possible. So it also makes it look good. This build was notorious. It was on YouTube from the channel The Verge because the cable management was awful, and a lot of PC building no-nos were done here. The RAM is also next to each other. Don't be that. Okay, so I routed my cables through my case before I put the motherboard in, simply because I'm very familiar with my motherboard. So I put the cables through before I put the motherboard in. Okay, here you'll see that I already mounted my cables in. I know where they go because I'm familiar with the case, motherboard, and cables pretty well. So with your motherboard, you're going to have this metal shield called an I/O shield. And what you're going to do with that is line it up with the back of your case in the square hole here. Well, it's a rectangle, but this rectangle hole here. The I/O shield blocks dust from getting your computer. It also adds a seamless look, so it kind of has a double purpose here. Even consoles have this. If you look at the back where all the video ports come from, it's kind of the back of their motherboard. So random talking point there, but I use this place to line up my motherboard when I put it in. So what I'm going to do, you'll see in a second here in the video, what I do after I get the I/O shield wrong. I was messing with this far too long trying to film at the same time, but I use this to also help me line up the motherboard. So here it is with my motherboard in. I kind of just slide the motherboard around. There's holes in the motherboard that will coincide with your case. Make sure you get a motherboard and case that fit for each other. Check your websites and manuals, but line up your motherboard to where you can see the screw holes where you can screw down your motherboard. That's very important. You want to make sure also, if your motherboards are not risen off of your case, you have standoff screws. Those sometimes come with motherboards that need to be rose up. It just depends on your case. If it's touching the case, rise them up. If it's not touching the case because it's already risen up with the case, that's fine, just screw it in. But you want to line up the holes and screw everything in, and then after that, you can plug all your cables in. Okay, so the next point I want to talk about are storage devices. So we have SSDs and hard drives. So for a normal hard drive, they are now considered slow. They have an actual spinning part inside, and that's going to make them slow compared to solid state drives, which have no moving parts. So a SSD like I have in the middle is called a SATA SSD. That will need two power cable, well, one data cable, one power cable, and a hard drive will need two cables as well. The M.2 drive on the left here will actually go directly in the motherboard. Make sure you put that in before you get the motherboard in the case, or it's going to be an annoying process. So include that with the parts you put in the case, and I'm sorry I didn't have that to install in this video. So this is a SATA cable. This is one of the cables that goes into your drive. It goes into the drive to the motherboard. And then also we have SATA power, which will go from the drive into your power supply. And then if you're wondering where your drives go, that really depends on your case. So with my NZXT S340 case, I have drive slots at the bottom as highlighted here. And I also have drive slots in the window area where everyone can see. They have two slots that they want you to put SSDs because at the time my case was made, it was kind of newer technology to have an SSD. So you really would want to show that off. So Just remember, the more drives you have, the more storage you have, and also remember that SSDs are noticeably more expensive than hard drives, but they can load your computer in seconds when you turn it on, and they load games multiple times faster than hard drives, which will seem painfully slow if you have a hard drive compared to an SSD. Okay, so here I'm showing you cable management. You're going to have your power supply at the bottom of the case. It goes in and gets screwed in. And building the PC is routing cables through this case to go into your motherboard. Your case will also have cables that come with it. These get plugged into the motherboard so your power button work and the USB ports on the case work. But a lot of building a computer is managing these cables. This is a lot like most of the build actually. So here I will be showing you guys how to install a CPU cooler. And what happens there is your CPU needs to be cool, so a metal piece will go on top of it and get screwed down into the 4 holes around it. Each cooler's install process is different, but all of them need to be screwed on top of the motherboard. So first, what you have to do is get what's called thermal paste. This will come with your cooler. If your CPU, came with your cooler, it will have thermal paste on it. You don't need extra thermal paste, but if you have a fancy cooler that the paste is separate, what you want to do is put a pea-sized dot in the middle of the top of your CPU, like shown in the video here. The pea-sized dot method is very accepted now. I was recording, so it wasn't a perfect circle, but that's all you need. And what happens is when you screw the cooler on, it's gonna spread that paste around. Do not put the cooler on without putting paste on it. You will completely destroy your processor. And I mean, it will be destroyed when you turn your computer on. So you need to thermal paste your computer. Pro tip for CPU coolers, as well as car tires actually, you want to tighten things in diagonal patterns, not a circle pattern. This applies even pressure. Okay, here I just wanted to go over what I feel is the hardest part of building a computer because I'm so used to it, but this is the hardest part for me. These little connectors for your case buttons to work, they go in a part of your motherboard that's really small. I'm 6 feet, 190, 185 pounds. This part is actually a little difficult for me because my hands are big. Soon this will be one cord, but it's not one cable yet in most motherboards, so that's hard for me. Okay, so moving on to the most important part. What makes a gaming computer a gaming computer is a graphics card. This is basically the imagination of your computer. This thing draws graphics to the screen. These are in consoles too. This is what makes things happen graphics wise. So they go in the PCIe slot in your motherboard, and you'll see it lines up with these holes at the back of the case that I showed. My graphics card is a 5700 XT. There are cheaper ones than this model. Graphics cards can be $70 all the way to $2,000 depending on your needs. I will be playing 1080p and my goal is 102, 144 FPS, so this works for that. So you want to slot your card in the PCIe slot and push down. If you can't push down, make sure the latches on the slot are open, and that's on the motherboard. There's latches, make sure those are pushed down, and get your graphics card in the slot with the bottom connection. And you just want to make sure that it sits flush. You want to be closest to the CPU as possible to get the best speed of your graphics card. And you want to line up with the holes in the back of the case and screw it in. Also, you will need power connectors for high-powered graphics cards. Your manual, your websites will tell you what power cord you need. Mine needs 2. And that's it plugged in. I have a Wi-Fi card in my smaller, what's called PCI Express slot. And this fits like a graphics card as well, but this goes on the back with the antenna that was showed in the beginning of the video, and that's so I can have high-speed internet connection even if I'm not plugged into a cable, because I need to have good speeds for my gaming, also for, uploading videos. All right, this is the build complete. I will touch on the Rgb lighting here. It's a huge talking point. No, it doesn't improve performance. That's just kind of a meme, but the LED lights I use here come on a strip, and I just recommend you hide the strip as much as possible. I think it kind of looks tacky if you look in the PC and the strip is just out in the open. That's a personal thing. But other than that, make sure you shop around for your parts and get the best deals on parts. Never buy the first part you see. Stay away from things that are well above MSRP. Just don't buy the first thing you see that you can get ripped off. Other than that, like, comment, subscribe, dislike. whatever you feel is comfortable, just let me know what your thoughts are. And yep, this is the build.